Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 48 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Arizona Coyotes, in which the Sharks have finally won 6-4. The 8-game losing streak finally comes to an end here, and the Sharks get 2 points with this regulation win over the Coyotes. And this one started off very well for the San Jose Sharks. They scored the first goal of this game from Noah Gregor within just the first few seconds of this one. And unlike in previous games where after scoring the first goal, they would immediately give one up to the other team and then kind of just lose from there, the Sharks would actually get the next one and make it 2-0 rather early on with Brent Burns' goal. And while later in the first period, the Arizona Coyotes would respond and actually have a pretty decent finish to that period in general, after 20 minutes, you could say that the Sharks did get actually some very good looks, and of course the 2-0 lead was quite nice to have. Early in the second period, the Sharks would once again get on the board quite quickly, and they'd extend their lead to 3-0 from Logan Couture and then 4-0 from Erik Karlsson. And it looked as though the Sharks could maybe cruise to a victory in this one, but that would not be the case in the end. The Coyotes would pull their goaltender, Kemper would step out and Adin Hill would step in, and then they would quickly respond with 2 goals of their own. And it would be a 4-2 score by the end of the second period. So the Sharks would come in with a 2-goal lead and they would leave with a 2-goal lead. So not too much damage done. However, in the third period, the Coyotes would get yet another, this one from Chychrun, and it would be 4-3 and suddenly a 1-goal game in a game that was once led by 4 from the Sharks' standpoint. The Sharks would make it 5-3 with a Barabanov goal, but then with still about 5 or so minutes left, Chychrun would score another, and it would be a 1-goal game once more. However, the Sharks would do a solid job in the last couple of minutes. They wouldn't really allow the Coyotes to get settled in the offensive zone. Adin Hill ended up only coming out of the net with about 45 seconds remaining, and the Sharks would eventually get an empty netter from Evander Kane to win it 6-4. First thing to talk about will not be the playoff race, even though in the previous review I did say if the Sharks manage to win both of these upcoming games against the Arizona Coyotes in regulation, they may still very well be in the playoff race. I was not anticipating the Blues actually being victorious here tonight against the Colorado Avalanche again, and so as it stands, the Sharks will be likely chasing the St. Louis Blues for that last playoff position, and they currently find themselves not only 5 points behind them, but also the Blues having 2 games in hand on them. And half of the Sharks' remaining games on the schedule are against one of the best teams in the league, Colorado Avalanche, and even one of the remaining games is against the Vegas Golden Knights. So with 5 of 8 against some really tough competition like that, I just don't really see how the Sharks can still compete in that regard. So that brings us to these last 8 games where Bob Booner has seemingly made it clear that some young players will be given some chances to play up in the lineup, considering how previously in this season it has gone. Not many young players were necessarily given too much of a chance. A lot of the times while they might be injected into the lineup, they would be given less than 10 minutes of ice time to actually make any sort of impact. But here tonight, we saw both LeBanc and Ryan Donato step out of the lineup due to injuries, which I can imagine these were probably sort of lingering injuries that were enough to play through, when the Sharks were actually still in the playoff race. But now that they are outside of the playoff race, you might as well try and rest up to be, not re-aggravate an injury like that. And stepping in for them is, in the end, Jeffrey Viel. Not a huge deal, but most importantly, Barabanov, who was picked up at the trade deadline from the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for Antti Suomela. Now, that was an interesting trade when it happened in the first place. Suomela was a player who had some potential, but couldn't necessarily put it well together here in San Jose. And Barabanov was a player who the Maple Leafs had brought over from the KHL and were looking to get into their lineup, but there was just never really any room because the Leafs are an extremely deep team. So this was supposed to be a relatively mutual deal between these two teams, where Suomela was brought to a new environment and Barabanov was brought to a new environment himself, where he could maybe get some more ice time. And that's exactly what happened here tonight. He's put immediately onto the second line here with both Kane and Hurdle, and actually given a pretty decent amount of ice time. Now, when we come down later on, I'll mention Barabanov more later, When we come down in over these last 8 games, I suspect we will probably see a few more new faces into the lineup. It'll be interesting to see how far down the depth charts that the San Jose Sharks actually decide to go. Will we see players like maybe Melnichuk in goal get an opportunity? Will we maybe see someone like Merkley get an opportunity? Pasternak could get an opportunity on the defensive side as well. Players like Alex True could get another look in the AHL. Someone like Latunov could potentially get a look. So we'll definitely see what will happen over these last 8 games, but I do suspect we will get some nice young player looks as we move down the stretch here. Next, I'll be talking about Koshinash as he gets the start here tonight and his first NHL victory with the 6-4 win, but all in all, with the fourth goal that he did let in here to Jacob Chychrun, I cannot in good conscience say that this was a good game from Koshinash. These first 2 goals, difficult saves, absolutely. The third one, which was the first from Chychrun here tonight, was one that he could have had, though a very, very nice shot. Probably should have had, but again, very nice shot. But this fourth one is kind of an unacceptable goal to be let in, and maybe this was one that is less inexcusable because Koshinash is a rookie, so maybe you can excuse it for rookie mistakes or whatever, but realistically, even at an AHL level, this shouldn't be something that happens. Koshinash has the puck up against his chest, and it seems as though he thinks it's in his glove, and so when he lowers his glove that it will still be held, and the refs would blow the whistle, but actually it's up against his chest outside of his glove, so when he lowers his glove, the puck actually pops out without any sort of whistle for a freeze, and the Coyotes are able to use the ensuing scramble to push the puck in and get it to within one goal again. And so that is just an unacceptable goal for Koshinash to let in. So while he does get the victory here tonight, as I said, I cannot really say that this was that good of a game from Koshinash. When it comes up to the next one, it's possible we see him again. It's possible we go back to Martin Jones. As I had pointed out in the previous point, the Sharks at this point will seemingly try and go with a bit more of a loose lineup. And so honestly, the goaltending, the starter doesn't particularly matter over these last 8 games. And next, I will bring it back to Barabanov. As I said, he started here on the second line with Kane and Hurdle, who was given a pretty decent amount of ice time. And I must say, he actually responded quite well to this pretty expanded role on the team. He also even got some power play time and ended up being one of the Sharks, if not even you could probably make the argument, though maybe Evander Kane surpasses him in this regard, you could definitely make the argument that Barabanov was potentially the most effective forward for the San Jose Sharks here tonight. He scores a goal, which was nice, and that actually ended up being the game winner here tonight. And just all in all, he was a very effective forward in the offensive zone. He wasn't blowing anybody away. These weren't some crazy plays. He's not the next Connor McDavid at the NHL level, but he kind of reminds me in a way of what another Sharks player who has really shown up here this season, which is Rudolf Sbalser, is a player who's not, insanely skilled, not going to put up insane numbers, but a player who can play up in the top 6, maybe be a middle 6 type of forward for the San Jose Sharks. And I suspect Barabanov will get a lot of more consistent looks over these last 8 games. I'd be relatively surprised if he actually finds himself outside the lineup at some point. The main difference here between Barabanov and Balcers is that Balcers at the end of the season will be a restricted free agent. As such, the Sharks can absolutely retain him, and I suspect they will. However, at the end of this season, Barabanov will be an unrestricted free agent, and so while the Sharks can definitely make a run at trying to retain his services, it is also possible that Barabanov will leave to go to another team, because while this is technically Barabanov's first NHL season, he is not a rookie because he played multiple seasons in the KHL and is actually 26 years old, which is, I believe, 1 year older than what is the sort of the max for being an NHL rookie. So, for instance, someone like Kirill Kaprizov, who we just saw the Minnesota Wild, even though he had 5 years of KHL experience under his belt, he is still technically young enough to be in Calder consideration. Barabanov is not. So it'll be interesting if the Sharks try and make a run to keep Barabanov on this team, because this first game definitely makes it seem like he could be a good fit for the team. And finally, I will once again talk about Greg Pateryn. So in the previous game, I mentioned Pateryn as he stepped in as the 6th defenseman due to injuries to Radim Shemek. And I said that Pateryn was probably the Sharks' best 7th defenseman that we've seen this season. And once again, I was extremely impressed with Pateryn's performance in this game here tonight, which actually got sort of the gears turning in my mind about what we could see for Pateryn, maybe even past this season. Because, of course, as you know, there will be an expansion draft at the end of this season. The Seattle Seattle Kraken will be coming into the NHL, similar to how the Vegas Golden Knights did just a few years ago. And in that Vegas Knights Golden expansion draft, the Sharks ended up losing David Schlemko. And in this expansion draft, it is a bit more unknown who the Sharks will lose, and it's likely to be a better player than they gave up those few years ago. But in one of the more bold situations, it's possible that the Sharks could end up losing Brent Burns in an expansion draft situation like that, and so there will be an open, available defensive slot. And with how Patterson has looked, he could definitely be someone to slot in that regard. In a maybe less bold situation, and the Sharks protect Brent Burns along with Vlasic and Karlsson, who they have to protect, it's possible that the Sharks could end up losing someone like Radim Shemek to the Seattle Kraken, which would then leave, again, the Sharks available with a sixth defensive slot who could definitely be filled by Greg Patterson. Because while Patterson was making $2.25 million this year, considering he's moved around now 3 different teams this season, I suspect Patterson will be getting a pretty decently sized discount, also considering the fact that it is a stagnant salary cap this season. As such, while you might be trying to leave a space open to get some more rookies in place, I feel as though Patterson would not only be a very, very solid 6th defenseman, but he could also be a very solid 7th defenseman, just judging by these past couple of games. So we'll see if the Sharks try to also retain his services like they will try to do with Barabanov as well. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Wednesday. They will take on the Arizona Coyotes once again. And so while technically the playoff hopes are still alive, so if you want to hold out hope in that regard, that game is definitely a must win. If not, just try and enjoy the rest of these last few games of this season and see if the Sharks can get any sort of surprise contributions in the lineup like they did here tonight. Class dismissed.